So happy to be out here. This actually is really great. I live in Somerville, so I'm literally right down the street. So I was like, this is great to come out, drive through here all the time, dropping my girls off to school. And so in the morning, it's easy. In the afternoon, try to make sure I don't run over any of you all. All right, so want to jump in? So first, I just want to share a little bit about me. And so this is really my baby in terms of browning the green space. And like Reverend Vernon shared, my background is in environmental engineering. I did that both at MIT and the University of Michigan. I actually got into the PhD program at Georgia Tech, but was a little burned out and decided to go back where I'd interned at Texas Instruments in Dallas. And I came back up here, when I say to see about a girl, and now I'm married and have 2 daughters. When I came back, I did business school at Sloan. And so I was a non-traditional student coming out. And actually, I'll go to the next slide because I'll talk a little bit more about this. I was a non-traditional student coming out. So I actually went, well, when I came back, I did Sloan. And then I went to work in state government. You know, most people coming out of B school, it's, you know, investment management, investment banking, high-tech consulting. I went to work as a special assistant to the Undersecretary of Environment at the, in the Patrick administration. And then after a year or so, I went to become the Associate Commissioner at the Department of Environmental Protection. So I worked on Obama's economic stimulus plan. I was the director of brownfields, so cleaning up contaminated properties, putting them back into productive use. I was the director of environmental justice. So, regardless of what race or ethnicity you are, how much money you make, what language you speak, you should have a right to clean air, to clean water, to open spaces. And I sat on the Massachusetts Food Policy Council. In addition, I do a few other things. I'm part of the Boston Majira Project. If you're not familiar with it, it's a really grassroots organization, really doing a number of different things. But I sit on the investment committee there and really trying to change the way we think about investments. I'm part of a national organization called the Black Innovation Alliance, and I sit on the board at the Museum of Science. In terms of the things I do day to day, I have a consulting practice called Msaada Partners, and I also run another nonprofit called the Majira Project. So we do that in conjunction with the Boston Consulting Group. So we're helping to support Black, Latinx, and Indigenous entrepreneurs to grow their businesses. And coming out of both of those nonprofits, the Majira Accelerator and Brown in the Green Space that I'll talk about for the duration of this presentation, we've actually launched a venture capital fund to invest in Black, Latinx, and Indigenous families. So I'm doing a lot, trying to, my goal for next year is to do fewer things better. And that's why I'm trying to grow organizations and bring on more staff, because all of these things are doing really good work. So that gives you a little bit of the, sort of my education background, my, business and corporate background. But really, I talked in that last slide and Vernon shared, I grew up in a fence line community. So I want to talk a little bit more about that, because I think that is the thing that really is my why about, why I do this work. So I'm from a place called Anniston, Alabama, small, probably in the 30,000 range, small city in Northeast Alabama, right on I-20 between Birmingham and Atlanta. And if you've seen Hidden Figures and when the bus was turned over, that's my hometown. So I didn't grow up with a boogeyman. There was the Ku Klux Klan. There were what I would call there were the Jones boys in the Welborn area. And so I had that sort of racial piece there, especially growing up, in the South. So that was there. In addition to that, when I say fence line community, well, what does the fence, what's on the other side of the fence? So there was a Monsanto solution, well, I guess named Solution now. There was a Monsanto plant. And, I thought it was normal for a couple times a month for it to smell like hydrogen sulfide or, rotten eggs, because when they were cooking at the plant, that would be taking place. Additionally, I think they were doing pesticides, fertilizers. When I was in elementary school, they cut through the toe of a landfill. And in that landfill were polychlorinated biphenyls, and so PCBs. And they actually tried to cover it up. And so there's actually a 60-minute special that talks about my hometown and the sort of devastation around the PCB contamination. To add insult to injury, on the other side of my hometown was the Army's chemical warfare school. It's called Fort McClellan. It got closed during BRAC, or it's a base relocation authorization closure. But before that, it was the MP school, and it was the chemical warfare. So when you talk weapons of mass destruction, we had them. We had the nerve gases, the sarin, all of those things. And on the other side of town, at the Anniston Army Depot, that's where they would do things with them. But they actually built an incinerator there. And so you can see that wasn't too far from where I grew up. And I can remember when I think I was at the University of Michigan, or maybe up here, and my parents saying, yeah, we got a roll of tarp and some duct tape. If there's a release, that's what we were supposed to do. And I was like, my understanding of transport theory and diffusion and all that didn't feel too safe to me. Good thing now they've actually gone through, I think the incinerator has done what it was supposed to do, and they've gotten rid of a lot of those things. But for a pretty good while, that the community I grew up was at risk if there had been an exposure or release. And then in addition to those environmental issues, and some of this, I talked about food policy. I had to look at the number. Alabama is top of the list in terms of, concentration of fast food restaurants. And my hometown in Alabama is at the top of the list in Alabama. We're not too far from the Talladega Super Speedway. There are a lot of hotels. I think they're used to a lot of people being there. And so there's just a plethora of fast food restaurants there. And then in addition to that, for my small hometown, and we don't have 100,000 people, but on a per capita basis, in terms of murders and violent crimes, we're some of the highest in the nation. And so I wasn't aware of all these statistics growing up, but this is how I grew up. These were the things that were going on. And I want to say it's not all that bad. Like I said, I didn't know, I'm from the South. There was, great food, great friends, great family. I grew up in a Baptist church, so I had all those, and football. And my admin put this slide together, my executive assistant. I'm an Auburn fan, so I have to let her, I wouldn't have that picture up there. I think she was like Alabama and thought that. And so when I update my slides, I'll make sure I update it accordingly. But, I would be remiss if I let you guys think I was an Alabama fan. You can flip-flop on being a Republican or a Democrat, but you can't flip-flop on being an Alabama or an Auburn fan. All right. So now what I want to do is talk about Brown in the green space. That's just giving you the setup of where we are, and I want to make sure I leave some time for questions. But in addition to that, when I think about it, there are really two big things that we're tackling. We're trying to tackle the racial wealth gap, and we're trying to tackle climate change. And you can see from this slide a number of the areas that we're looking at. So thinking about the problems in terms of careers. So how do we create pathways to employment for people who want to be in the space? So that's super important. In terms of companies, how do we remove barriers to employment? How do we think about unconscious bias? How do we think about, where do people go and recruit? And even if you get people in, how do you promote them? How do you make sure it's not a toxic workplace where they are? Then we also look in terms of capital. The numbers are abysmal, not just in the green space, but all over. A lot of what you see is, the number for women is like 3 to 4% of women receive venture capital. 1% African Americans. Heaven forbid you're an African American woman, like 0.002%. And so a lot of that is, really going back to that wealth gap. The people who have money in this country right now are rich white men. And actually, if you go back to the Constitution, a lot of those are systematic things that are in there. It's really set up for what white landed men. And so, we're working on that, but it really hasn't completely gotten there. So we're looking at that. In addition to entrepreneurs or startups, we're also thinking about small business owners, especially in things that don't necessarily need to be high tech. We're just thinking about energy efficiency, buttoning up houses or putting solar on roofs, or doing EV charging stations. How do we think about that work and make sure that we get more Black, Latinx, and Indigenous contractors getting those contracts of $500,000 or $1 million or more? We think that's super important. And then last but not least, and is really the foundation of the work that we do, is around, making sure, that the people who are most vulnerable, are taken care of. And so, because you can see the numbers, and that, once again, it goes back to income and wealth. Do you rent versus own? All of those types of things come into play. So given that, our vision is a just energy transition. The energy transition is coming, or it's on top of us. We're talking about a green wave, a tsunami. If we talk about the Inflation Reduction Act, the question is it just? Is it really going to hit the people and be beneficial for the people who really need it the most? EPA Justice 40 initiative says 40% of the funds going should be making it to our most vulnerable communities. If you look, I think it was like 369 billion. The numbers aren't penciling out right now, and there's always some leakage. And so, organizations like ours and Crew, where Vernon is, and others, we're trying to make sure that some or that funding and the sort of rightfully adjusted amount gets to our most vulnerable communities. Speaking of communities, what we try to do is lead with communities. In terms of values, we're community first. And so making sure that we're not, because we do work with a lot of corporations, academic institutions, private sector groups, but we want to go first and foremost, what we're trying to do is support communities, especially communities of color and low to moderate income communities. And second, we believe in climate justice. And we think climate justice is, there's an alphabet soup of acronyms, but we think the one that probably works best is DIEJ, but that's like DIEJ doesn't work from a marketing perspective, but we think that's the way it goes. There's diversity first, then there's inclusion, then there's equity, and then you get to justice. So a lot of what we're doing at the beginning is just diversity. Can we make sure, we work out of CIC Boston and Greentown Labs. And so in our name, browning a green space, Greentown Labs is one of those green spaces. We want to brown that space. I got a couple degrees from MIT, but a startup that's 3 young white guys from MIT, not the best startup it can be. Can we first diversify that by, can we add a woman to the team? Can we add a person of color to the team? It just makes the teams better. And this isn't just me saying it, Boston Consulting Group, McKinsey, there are copious reports that say diverse teams do better. And so we want to make sure that we focus on diversity, then inclusion, then equity. On the right-hand side of the slide, all of those are really talking about how we operate and how we function. So as we think about it, looking at trust, transparency, collaboration, especially in the nonprofit sector and in the government sector, oftentimes what you see is people sort of, and the organizations pitted against each other. They're competitive grant processes. So people don't want to talk to each other about what they're doing because, well, I'm not going to be able to get the money. You're going to get the money. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is sort of blow all of that up and say, hey, our mission is threefold. We want to create jobs, we want to build wealth, we want to reduce energy burden. If that's what you're doing, we're happy to partner with you. And so if we need to, step back and follow because you're doing it, we'll do that. If we need to lead because there's a gap, we'll do that. But really, we just want to get this work done and, really being transparent and just calling it how it is and being sort of truth tellers, but doing it from a place of love and compassion, and sort of working that way. So my engineering background, I'm a true believer of systems dynamics. And so a lot of what, I even heard as I was working as the Director of Environmental Justice at the MassDEP was when I would talk to people in gateway cities, in environmental justice communities. So here in Massachusetts, that would be Lawrence and Lowell and Worcester, New Bedford and Fall River, Springfield, Holyoke, Chicopee, Pittsfield, those places where there are larger minority populations or larger concentration of minorities, oftentimes lower income, and also there's higher levels of English isolation or English as a second language. So in Massachusetts, Lawrence would be the quintessential EJ or gateway community because, large minority population. Lawrence is the city of immigrants. That's actually its name. And so you've got a lot of immigrants, large Latinx population, and it's a mill city. And so the mills were there. If you go back, before we had electricity and all this energy and things we were thinking about, it was water. Water was what, drove the economy. Once we went, on grid, people left those mills. And so a lot of that manufacturing, all those jobs and everything left. And so you've got disinvestment. And so, it's one of those areas where you have that. When I would talk to those folk in those communities and talk about climate change and greenhouse gases, they would say, we need jobs. We need better education. We need housing, affordable transportation, access to healthy food. We need the police to stop harassing us. And so there's this piece where, while I was focusing on environmental justice, what I was hearing was economic justice, and I was hearing social justice. And so we think that all these things need to work together in tandem. We can't work on one alone. And for example, maybe, the contractors on the economic development side, most jobs in this country aren't with big corporations. They're not with Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies. Most jobs are with small businesses. And so if we grow our workforce in this space, we also think we need to grow, a group of small businesses, and especially small businesses led by owners of color, because we think they're more apt to hire employees of color. And then on the community side, we think that actually translates to a larger adoption of services. So you're talking about energy efficiency or putting solar on roofs. We've heard anecdotally, people doing work in Lawrence, and it's like, young white guys from the suburbs, talking to a, older Latina. Man, wouldn't that be great if it's a, young, Latinx person from the community doing that work? We think there would be a, higher incidence of uptake. So, like I said, we're based here in Boston, and spreading out across Massachusetts and using that gateway city approach, but also looking at New England. And we've held New York off for a little bit because it's a bit of a monster compared to all the others, but starting to look into New York as well. But so you can think of us as a regional organization. So, we're focused on the Northeast, at least for now, but a few of our partners. So I talked about, we're in Greentown Labs. So for example, Greentown Labs is here in Somerville. Well, I guess we're technically in Medford, but Greentown Labs is in Somerville, but they also have a location in Houston. And for those of you who aren't aware, Greentown Labs is the largest clean tech incubator in the country. So we can see working with them, and I travel down there a couple of times and probably will do that on a regular basis. We are our own 501c3 nonprofit as of a couple of months ago. But before that, our fiscal agent or fiscal sponsor was the Northeast Clean Energy Council. And so former mayor of Somerville, Joe Curtatone, now runs that organization. And so they are a Northeast organization doing a lot of work in New England and New York, but also thinking about, transitioning, are they moving further down the Eastern Seaboard into the Mid-Atlantic or sort of DC area? So we can see following them. And another one of our partners is the Emerald Cities Collaborative. And Emerald Cities has offices in Boston and LA and Oakland. And so they're across the country. And so we can see that down the road, just not right away. So going back to what I talked about before, if we, really think about, well, what's different about us as Brown in the green space? What is our value proposition? We think we do like three things really well. We convene across all those different areas. So we see people working in the workforce development space or in the business development space or in the community development space. We haven't seen too many organizations that are working across all three of them in sort of the systems way that we're doing. The other thing is we identify and fill gaps. Like I said, we're not trying to step on people's toes. We're really just trying to, where are gaps? What's going on in the ecosystem? So thinking about the sort of tendons and the sinews, the connective tissue, we're trying to do that and connect the dots and like pull, really coalition building and making that work. And that last piece is building bridges. How do we, do that piece? So those things flow into each other, and that's really what we work on. So this talks about, a few of our programs that we're doing. I don't think we have time to go through all of them. I'll pull up a few that are more, like I said, community first. I'll bring up and talk a little bit more in detail about a handful of those. But if I think about it on the workforce development piece, a lot of the work that we've been doing is with two-year, institutions, community colleges. So think about a Benjamin Franklin Cummins Institute of Technology or a Roxbury Community College, or the other pieces. Why college at all? Do you need a college degree? Whether it's a community college or four-year institution to do some of these jobs. So we also work with, people who have certification programs or are just trying to get people in, some of them here and some abroad. And that's why, a Charger Health, in Los Angeles is doing, training electricians to maintain EV, systems. A Block Power, out of New York is, trying to, decarbonize and electrify houses on a block by block, basis, and even like a city basis. We work with All In Energy, here locally, and some of the work that they're doing. So really looking at that, we did a pilot program a couple of years with Mass Clean Energy Center to, get more Black and Brown students into their clean energy summer internship program. So we're expanding that. And we're also looking at scholarships. And like I said, on the economic side of this, looking at scholarships, and not just traditional scholarships and tuition, but what we've heard for even these programs, like we're saying, we don't necessarily have to train people in that technical side of things. So what do? How do we promote and get people to know that they exist? And then on the backside, how do we get them into internships, apprenticeships, post-bac programs? So that's a lot of what we're doing. Been a big focus on offshore wind with a lot of the recent announcements and things opening up. And so thinking about, Commonwealth Wind 1 and the stuff with Vineyard Wind and Avangrid and Mayflower. So we're doing a lot of work with them. I actually partner with a group out of Aberdeen, Scotland called the Exodus Group, because they know wind and they know that work, but we know the community and we're connected to people on the ground. So that's the types of partnerships that we're talking about. On the business development piece, we're actually working from the startup side on an accelerator with Greentown Labs. And so hopefully some information will come out soon about that. And literally just last night, we kicked off a contractor boot camp, on the contractor side, because a lot of on the supplier diversity side, people are going, well, we can't find somebody doing this. But I was on a call with people last night who work for the investor-owned utilities, who are doing some of this work already, who work for large contract companies, who are certified electricians or plumbers or steel workers who know their trades, they just don't know business. And so what we're saying is, you know what, going back to some of my I-Corps training and some of that work, let's give them sort of a business 101 training. And actually, let's give them some funding. Let's pay them to go through the program. And actually, let's pay them at the end to get certified, to get set up, to help with legal costs, because those are the barriers that keep them from starting the businesses. And so we're excited to kick off that program. And last but not least, like I said, actually a couple more things. On that funding side, we're looking at a VC on-ramp program for next summer, where we really want to match Black and brown folk who have been in programs like Black VC or Pledge VC or HBCU VC. Let's place them with the clean energy venture funds here in the Northeast. Especially, we'll probably start with Massachusetts. So the breakthrough energy ventures, clean energy ventures, analog garage, our firm, the Lake of Ventures. Can we do that kind of work? Azola, Prime, Impact Fund. And so if we can get a half a dozen, we're starting to get them talking to each other and making it where they don't feel like the only one, because oftentimes it's very lonely when it's that way. Can we have more of a cohort model? And then on the community side, a lot of that is about community-based knowledge. Like, how do we really leverage that? How do we think more about that than people in their sort of ivory towers like Tufts or MIT or wherever, going into the community and saying, this is what you should be doing. How do we listen? I actually was just at a board meeting for the Environmental Business Council last week, and we were talking about flooding and some different things. And I said, all the hydrogeologists and PhDs and really cool people who are here, I don't need to go talk to them or look at flood maps to figure out where it floods in the neighborhood. You just go knock on the door of Mr. Johnson or Mrs. Johnson, who's been in the neighborhood for 30, 40 years. They know where it floods. How are we leveraging that type of knowledge? And how are we compensating people for that? And so, because that's what we've seen a lot is things are very extractive. All right, so this gets into a few of these. So we're looking at an equity before energy series with Northeast Clean Energy Council and others. So this is an example of, let's listen. You got 2 ears and 1 mouth, because you should listen more than you talk. And so how are we going out and really hearing what communities want? This is, well, was that the same one? Yeah, and so a little more detail into that. We're actually doing a community leap program. So we have an award from the Department of Energy to have technical assistance, not monetary funding, but technical assistance from DOE and the National Renewable Energy Lab, really focusing on Lawrence, thinking about decarbonization and electrification, looking at, EV and mobility, and think about it. We say often, sometimes flippantly, these things are life and death. A few years ago, there was an explosion in Lawrence, and a guy died, from that Columbia gas line explosion. How do we take, as you think about the transition off of gas, where does that happen first? Most of these transitions, whether it's solar, coming off of gas, doing it, is oftentimes people in affluent neighborhoods who can do the things in terms of, because they're just barriers. I'll give a few examples and I'll move on. If you think of energy efficiency, if you rent, then it's really, in a sense, not up to you. Does your landlord do it? Does your landlord have incentives to do it? Or are they misplaced? And so, one, you're already at a disadvantage if you don't own. Two, even if you are a homeowner, a lot of the housing stock, my house is like early 1910s housing stock. And so there's asbestos. And so you got to take care of the asbestos first. What if you're talking about wiring? There's knob and tube wiring. So there's old wiring. What if there's mildew? What if your roof is in disrepair? So you got to deal with all of those things before you can tap into some of the funding that is there. And then oftentimes a lot of the funding is the rebate programs. If you're living check to check, just making ends meet, a rebate program really doesn't do much for you. And so how do you do that? So I think we're not a policy shop, so we're not solely focused on policy, except to the extent we want to make sure there's a two-way communication between some of the communities that we work with and some of the advocacy and policy groups that we're talking about. But we're trying to think of what are creative ways to get around those barriers. Can we have a barrier removal fund that we can help to do some of that work? Even on the contractor side, a lot of the folk that I was just talking about. Well, now you got to get bonded. You got to have extra insurance. And, insurance, the bean counters, they want as much insurance as possible. They're all about de-risking. Well, how do you do that if you're, a sort of solo entrepreneur? Where do you get the money to do that? So we're thinking of creative ways. We haven't pulled the trigger on them, but, do we pull together a cooperative that sort of helps people build up a little bit, and sort of, can we help with some of that front end and back office support in the beginning? Massachusetts general law says here in Massachusetts, if you go after a bid, you have to put up, I think, like 5% of that bid as a bid deposit. So if you're going after $1 million bid, you got to put up $50,000. So if you're a small, so like that's another barrier to doing that work. So for us, could we have a $300,000 revolving loan fund, or we could just give, if they're doing it, I mean, it's just a deposit. If they don't make it, we get it back. If they do make it, maybe we take a few percent or something, but really just having that to, remove some of those barriers. So we're thinking of those things. And that's this piece that I was just talking about is, can we do some of those things? Can we actually get that set up? Can we set up with sort of like an integrated, capital approach to being able to give grants, to give, maybe do equity in some of those startups, but also to, give loans, so have a mixed approach, as I think about, the Boston Ujima Project or, Boston Impact Initiative. They're examples of doing that, just not solely focused in this sort of clean energy space. We think there's a tremendous opportunity because there's so much work to happen. This is just letting you know our coalition partners. And the big thing about this, I typically think about, what was it, Regis Philbin, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? There was that option to ask the audience. We want to have a really good mix of people. And as you look at this list, you see for-profits, you see nonprofits, you see academic institutions, you see, venture capital firms, it's just a really good mix of folk. And we're really about, getting work done. And so our committee structure is about what are the problems, what are the gaps, how do people work? And it's great to have these folk at the table because they're coming with information and background. It makes it so we can, really advocate for this work and put programs in place and have partnerships with the right people as we go and look at, RFPs or grants that are coming out. So this is our team, and I'll see if I can wrap up shortly so we got some time for Q&A. And we started, and I'll let you know how we started and then go through these last few slides and wrap up. Coming out of some of the accelerator work I was doing and really on that venture capital piece, there's a young man who runs a company. He's actually in Assembly Row now, but he came out of Greentown Labs, a guy named Josh Avid, runs a company named Spark Charge. And one of my friends who I met, we were both at a VC event, actually had just met with one of my mentors, a guy named Carmichael. Carmichael Roberts actually runs Breakthrough Energy Ventures. He's on the, I think, 2-person investment committee. So that's, Bill Gates and others who are doing that work. So Carmichael is a Sloanie. And so we were at an event. The guy's name is Ed Joan Louis, and Ed is from Somerville. He's actually from the projects or the housing projects just under where my girls go to school, in sort of the Winter Hill area of Somerville. They go to the Healy School. So he was right there, and he went to UMass Amherst, and then he did Berkeley for business school. He actually did VC. If you all are hip hop fans, Nas has a VC firm called Queensbridge Capital. He interned or worked there for a bit, but he's got his own firm, Tell Venture Partners, out in LA. And he said, "Hey, can you invest in Josh?" And I said, "I don't have $25,000. I'm just getting up and going." But I said, "I know people." And what I did is I reached out to probably like 150 people in the Boston area, a few outside, and said two things. Can you invest in Josh? And two, let's talk about brown and green space, because I was seeing all of this stuff coming. And the first people who reached back out to me were the folk at Northeast Clean Energy Council. Dan was a part of that group, along with Peter Rothstein, who used to run it, was the president, Mitch Tyson and Jeremy McDermott. And we actually met in Kendall Square. This was back in August of 2019. I think in like early fall we met, and we were like, "Yeah, let's do this." And I said, "Pump your brakes. It can't be 4 old white guys. No disrespect to Jeremy and Kerry. We need to have a more diverse group." And so I reached out to the folk I knew at New England Women in Energy and Environment. So Jackie Ashmore, Dr. Jackie Ashmore, but also Carter Wall. She was at First Light Power. Carter just retired, I think. I just saw something on social media, but got them on board. And then my friend Amanda Downing, she's at National Grid, but she was also running the Boston chapter of the American Association of Blacks in Energy. And so having those initial conversations, we just did it, and we started to sort of snowball. And I can remember a few meetings in Kendall Square where we got together in person. And that was just before the pandemic. And then during the pandemic, we continued the meetings. And in September 24th of 2020, we actually launched as a Massachusetts nonprofit. So we're literally like 2 years old. We just passed our 2-year birthday. And so we've added board members since then. We have a really, like I said, on those committees, we have co-leads of all of those committees, from the industry who are doing work and who know these areas. And we've also added auxiliary committees. So thinking about membership, thinking about fundraising, looking at marketing and communications, and we're about to add, excuse me. As we talked about that policy and advocacy piece, we're going to add a policy coordination committee sometime soon. So we'll, the next time I do this presentation, we'll have 2 new faces up there on this slide. And this is our team, really deputy directors, my admin and deputy directors in each of those areas. So when we talk about creating jobs, that's the workforce development, building wealth is business development, and the reducing energy burden is community development. And we've got goals. These were just sort of putting a stake in the ground. We're actually in the process right now of updating these, because some of these were just, when you start things, you guess, and then you learn, as you're going. So as I think of that one that's like 5 down, says 100 high school students. We had an event at Greentown Labs, earlier this year, where we have students from Somerville High School, Charlestown High School, Boston Green Academy, Madison Park Vocational Technical High School, and the Dearborn STEM Academy. There were 120 students at that one event. And we've had multiple events and different things since then. So we know those numbers. We've blown through some of these, some of them we haven't met. And so we'll readjust this later this fall as we go into the next year. And here are our supporters. And so we have funding so far that's allowed us to grow our team and do the work from the Barr Foundation, from Commonwealth Wind or Avangrid, from DOE, from the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, from NREL, Mayflower Wind, John Merck Fund, Department of Commerce, the Wells Fargo Innovation Incubator connected with the National Renewable Energy Lab and with the South Coast Community Foundation, and just some individual donations, and we have memberships, for our companies, and that is really it. I got 10 minutes, but love to hear any questions you have, and really what we're doing again is really trying to have a just energy transition, and we want you all to be a part of it. Thank you. Right up on the podium, the back of the podium.
Thank you very much. This was such a inspiring talk, and you guys are doing such an amazing work. And I'm glad you had a slide with the goals, because I was going to ask you about that. So I will not ask you about that. Also, I understand you are a very young organization. Mm-hmm. So I would be really curious to see where you are in 5-10 years from now. But I guess I'll ask you a different question. So you have had a long history in from private industry to nonprofits to state government. So I guess my question would be, for somebody wanting to work in this space of branding the green space, what would be the best, what sector would be the most fulfilling / bigger impact to make?
Well, it depends, sort of that's the question, sort of can answer. But I think it depends on where you want to be. And it depends, I'm a Gen Xer. And so I'm assuming, as I look out in this crowd, this is more millennials and Gen Zers. And I think it's a little bit different. I think when I came out, and I'm an engineer by training, and so I went out and worked in corporate. I worked for a big company, and I actually thought that was good, because it allowed me an opportunity to learn, to be trained, to really hone my craft. But I think I see from this current generations more of a desire to just dive right in and sort of jump in. And I think there are opportunities to do that. Especially in this area, there are a lot of, well, it depends on what you want to do. If you're thinking private sector, there are a lot of startups that are doing really, good work in this space. There are a lot of nonprofits if you want to be on the ground and do community work. And I think there's also, I worked for close to a decade in state government. I think working in government is like super important. I actually I started with the Patrick administration in 2006. So it was like 2007, time frame. And it was really weird, because it was like, you're going into government. I remember there was a poll from the business school, and it was, maybe like 100 people did it. It was like one person in government. I was like, that's me. But like a year later, the stock market crashed, in like 2008. And so all my friends who had gone to consulting and high tech, like they were sitting on the beach, or actually some of them losing their jobs. And I was as busy as I could be. I was working on the economic stimulus plan, and just so much stuff was happening. And I think in government now, there's so much stuff happening. Whether you're at the state level, at the municipal level, or at the federal level, I think there are tremendous opportunities. So I think you should, follow your passion, but make sure that you got something to back it up. Can't just be passionate about something. It's good to have some background and some training and some experience. And that's why you have your, professors and mentors and different people to try to help guide you to what works best.
Thank you so much for being here with us. I'm actually really curious if you would share some of the thoughts you had around the new IRA and the bipartisan infrastructure law, and how maybe that's impacted the work of branding the green space, or specifically also if there are any kind of like new funding opportunities that you're directing these more vulnerable communities and entrepreneurs of color towards.
Yeah, so like I said before, there's a lot of money that is coming out. And I think there's a lot of activity. I think a lot of people are still scrambling to try to understand, where does this go? What does it look like? And I think still, unfortunately, now I'll use the Obama stimulus, the ARA as an example. Unfortunately, that's the problem with government, is it can do a lot really quickly, but it's not as nimble. And oftentimes there are concerns about, and maybe rightfully so, fraud and waste and abuse and different things. So oftentimes the money gets funneled through, programs. So versus the stimulus money going to the states to do whatever they wanted to do with it, they were like, you're gonna, in the environmental space, you're gonna do these 4 programs. So you're gonna do LUS, leaking underground storage tank, or DERA, diesel emissions retrofit, or this, like it really fit. And I think that just sort of handcuffs you a little bit, because you can't really do exactly what you want to do. I'm still sort of pouring through and understanding, but the good thing is there's just more funding coming. And it's also a lot of what helps, especially the market. On the market side is, markets deal really, they're fine with dealing with risk. They're not good with uncertainty. And what this is really showing is giving certainty. It is a real sort of stamp of approval that says, hey, we're doing clean energy. We're doing infrastructure. We're doing this work. So this actually allows the market to open up, the venture capitalists, the private equity, the banks to do it. So that adds on, so I don't want to rely just on what the government is doing, but they want to leverage that funding, and that really opens it up. So I see tremendous opportunity, really seeing it from a lot of the startups and different folk. I think the opportunities for contractors, and really just to do a lot of work that, a lot of it is sort of deferred maintenance that hasn't happened, and now it's going to happen.
Thanks for a great talk. I might have misunderstood one of the slides, so if this
Okay.
question doesn't make sense.
Yeah, no worries.
But I think you mentioned at one point that you're interested in scaling and scalability, and fairly, to, at least from my perspective, fairly quickly, right? By 2025. And I guess I wanted to ask why, or what scalability means to you, because a lot of your talk, I was so impressed, from your attention to systems thinking and complexity, from the network of 150 people that need to be built,
Yeah.
from knowing exactly who to go to in a given neighborhood to think about flooding, let's say. Like I'm picturing, this is about a lot of connections and a lot of boots on the ground. So I in that context of a really grounded New England project, how are you thinking about scalability?
So I do think, and one of the things I think too, and this is like, I'm new, well, not new to this, I've been doing it, but I'm in so many different like spaces, that one thing that I think is, I think we can be really lean in scale. So we're a 5-person organization, with interns and others, we do more, but with our volunteers, we have a lot. So if I think of 5 focus areas, with co-leads, that's 10, plus now we're going to have 4 auxiliaries, that's another 8. So we're like, we're 25, 30 people, who are really doing it outside of all the people who are on our committees, but still our core staff is relatively small. And so when I think about scaling, and I think that there's an opportunity to do, because a lot of it is connecting. So I didn't talk about it a lot, but grassroots here in the area, I think about the Green Justice Coalition. And so that's organizations like, Green Roots, Alternatives for Community and Environment, Neighbor to Neighbor. Like those organizations are really, really on the ground. How do we support them? How do we amplify the work that they're doing? How do we make sure that things aren't extracted for them? How can we, because sometimes, and I'll just use for an example, investor-owned utilities, they're probably not the happiest with some of the investor-owned utilities. As we think about some proposed rate increases, if you think about the Columbia gas explosion, if you think about siting issues. So it might be difficult for them to take funding from a National Grid or an Eversource. But we could do that. And then we could actually get it to them and keep that thing. And so when I think about scaling, I'm going, you know what, if we can figure it out with National Grid and Eversource, well, we can figure it out with Duke Energy down in DC. And we can figure it out with the Southern Company in Atlanta. But I think it's easier to do it because we would work with people on the ground. The Partnership for Southern Equity is on the ground in Atlanta. There are groups in DC. And so our piece is going, if it's just a connector function and really going in, it allows us to do more. And also the other thing, really, if I think about, even though I'm here, if I think about Black and Latinx and Indigenous people, if I think about where they are, they're not here as much. They're in the South. They're in Atlanta. They're in Houston. They're in the Southeast and Southwest. And to make more impact on those communities, I think we might need to be down there. I'm not a rush, like I said, but I think as we learn and as we figure it out, I think there are opportunities to partner. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Maybe this kind of follows that last question, but I'm struck at how much of your strategies are leveraging capitalism or certainly fitting within capitalism in order to do what capitalism isn't doing as you'd like to see it, but it's still within capitalism. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious what strategies or visions or ideas you have that are more subversive or maybe anti-capitalistic, that are maybe antithetical to how you're running, or that create tension within your organization that you'd like to see happen as well, that aren't about ownership, that aren't about extraction, that aren't about exploitation. Yeah. And there's a lot of tension there. I'm curious what you'd like to see.
No, I completely agree. I hear where you're coming from. I will say I'm probably still a capitalist, and don't want to necessarily apologize, but it's like the way things are working now, and I think I understand those and trying to go, well, what's wrong with capitalism? Where is it broken? How can we fix those things? But like I told you, I'm on part of the Boston Ujima project. A lot of what they're doing is going, hey, let's just do this differently. The investing model is, you know what, let's actually give more of the return to the people in the communities. That's like flipping capitalism on its head. I think we may try to think about some of those things. And like I said, as we think about that integrated capital fund, how do we think about program related and mission related investment dollars to do that type of work? But I think we are, and you sort of hit it on the nail. What I'm looking at is economic justice. And I do think there are folk who need to focus on how do we completely change this? But I'm going, man, stuff is so fast. I would go, I know how this works. Let's go tweak it. Let's, the VC side, well, it's pattern matching. It's pattern matching, older white guys investing in younger white guys. Okay, we can work on, trying to change that and flip it around and say that doesn't work. And I think there are things we can do in terms of, state and quasi organizations to go, hey, this money is everybody's money. This is different. That money, I think we can make a really good case to say that money needs to flow and represent everyone. But on the other side, I think what we do is we just try to, I don't want to say infiltrate, but let's get more Black and brown people in there. And let's do, I went to a predominantly white institution, MIT, but let's build some Morehouses and Spelmans and HBCUs. Let's have just some Black and brown led venture capital funds. And you're seeing some of that happen now, but even the way it's going, they're still gatekeepers. If you look at some of the articles and recent posts that are out there, it's still the same system to a certain extent. And you're right. Are we just playing around the edges versus really like a, huge sea change. So I don't know if that's a good answer, but it's, I try to be, so I'm going to be transparent. That's the transparent answer.
Thank you. We probably have to leave it at this since it's 1 o'clock, but let's give our speaker a big round of applause. Bring the brown space.
Thank you. Thank you.